all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, amen.
Please be seated. This honorable House now resumes its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mr. Javon Reed, Miss Kimberly Thompson, Miss Shakira Douglas, Mr. Donovan Hanson, Miss Monique Scott, Mr. Neville Charlton, Mr. Rattray, Mr. Witter, Mr. Bailey, Mr. McKellop, Miss Mullings, Mr. Waite, Miss Johnson, Miss Roden, Miss Hall, Miss Scott, Miss Lindsay, Mr. Siobhan Brown, Miss Brittany Elliott Williams, Mr. McGregor, Mr. Halstead, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Blair, Miss Brown, Miss Ariel Brown, that is, Mr. Christopher Brown, Miss Santosh Campbell, Miss Yakisha Campbell, Mr. Carty, Miss Dennis, Mr. Dobson, Mr. Ishmael Douglas, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Chad Edwards, Miss Tia Ferguson, Miss Ford, Miss Gale, Miss Graynor, Mr. Michael Grant Jr., Mr. Halstead, Miss Houghton, Mr. Davian Hemmings, Mr. Pierre Henry, Mr. Hill, Miss Hutchinson, Mr. Knight, Miss Masco, Mr. Marshall, Miss Anna K. McIntosh, Miss Sandrine McKenzie, Miss Melbourne, Mr. Moses, Miss Pinnock, Miss Powell, Mr. Ramsey, Miss Richards, Mr. Richardson, Miss Roberts, Mr. Sterling, Miss Stewart, Miss Dominique Thompson, Mr. Tahir Thompson, and Miss Sasha Gay Williams.
Statements by ministers. House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of the sitting to enable us to hear remarks and greetings from parliamentary and other representatives.
The question is that the sitting be suspended to enable us to hear remarks and greetings from parliamentary and other representatives. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This morning we will hear from Mrs. Heather Cook, Clerk to the Houses of Parliament.
Senator the Honorable Thomas Tavares Vinson, President of the Senate, Honorable Colonel Charles, Speaker of the House, Honorable Floyd Green, Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Senator Damian Crawford, Opposition Spokesman on Youth and Culture, Member of Parliament, Mr. Michael Phillips, Permanent Secretary and staff of the Ministry of Youth, Education and Information, staff of the Houses of Parliament, members of the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica, members of the National Youth Parliament, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all. I'm pleased to welcome you for this very special occasion, the sitting of the National Youth Parliament. Last year, I felt privileged to be present at the ceremony where young men and women were invested as members of the National Youth Parliament. I felt pride at seeing you, young Jamaicans, willingly taking up the mantle of leadership for your generation. Today, I feel a special pride to see you having reflected for improving the lives of the citizens of this country. Having reflected on your experiences over the past year. So often we complain in fora that are neither appropriate nor effective in achieving the goals we desire. I laud you young men and women for deciding to use this forum for working within the system, so to speak, to try to effect change. We at the Houses of Parliament are pleased to have played a part in preparing you for this occasion. I hope that today's sitting will be beneficial for all, that one, young parliamentarians will have freely aired your views and proposals. Two, policymakers will listen and apply where possible the strategies you have proposed. And three, Jamaica at large will see that our future leaders are bright, articulate, and have the best interests of our country at heart. Welcome once again, and hope we have a successful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cook. We'll now hear from Senator the Honorable Thomas Tavares Vinson, Queen's Counsel, the President of the Senate.
Normally I don't get such a big clap, because my role is to keep some of your senators under control, especially Damian. Honorable Colonel Charles, Speaker of the House, Honorable Floyd Green, Minister of State, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, himself could almost sit here as a youth parliamentarian. Likewise, Senator Damian Crawford, opposition spokesman on youth and culture. Parliamentarians, I notice Member of Parliament Michael Phillips, staff of the House of Parliament, the Ministry of Youth, Education and Information, members of the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica, members of the National Youth Parliament, media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. Now that long introduction we usually say when you don't know really what to say, right? And you bide in some time. But it is a part of the formality of the Parliament that we are required to go through it. Now, the theme for Youth Month, Level Up, is an invitation to you, our youth, to strive to better yourself in all aspects of your lives. And I applaud you for taking up the mantle of leadership and for recognizing that you cannot reach your full potential. You cannot level up unless those you lead, those you serve, also reach their full potential. Leadership is not about mere lip service. It involves a conscious and deliberate effort to understand the needs and aspirations of those you serve, and using this knowledge to craft the appropriate legislative and policy framework necessary for development. Now, from my point of view, I look forward to hearing the proposals you put forward today and urge my fellow parliamentarians, those who are here and those who are not but who may see these proceedings on television or may read the transcript later, to use the opportunity to listen to our youth, to hear their hopes and aspirations, and to use, where possible, and to put into practice the recommendations which you make today. We should also seek to find workable solutions for the issues which are raised in this forum. I find it reassuring to see our youth emulate the facets of good governance, listening, sharing thoughts, ideas, and strategies, all for the advancement of our beloved country, Jamaica, and this augurs well for the future of our nation. No doubt, over the years, you have heard some very bad behavior in the Parliament. Is that correct? And you know that every Tuesday they put Purnell under pressure. The Senate is under control because I control it. But they will try and they will test you. So in the same way that you are going through the process today, I expect that no doubt there is a Lambert Brown as Jr. has been planted somewhere. Or on the other side, Carencia Morrison. So you all have a good day, and we trust that something good will come out of this. And I feel confident that in the future, perhaps we will see many of you back here in your own right as members of the Senate or members of Parliament.
Thank you, President. We now hear from Senator Damian Crawford, Member of Parliament, Opposition Spokesperson for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to say a special good morning to the President of the Senate, the Honorable Thomas Tavares Finson, also to the Speaker of the House, the Honorable Purnell Charles, MP, JP, to the Chairman of the Youth Advisory Council, Mr. Aubrey Stewart, of course to the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Education, to the representative of the National Integrity Action, schoolmate of mine, Jamie Ann Chavance, to my good friend Floyd Green, Member of Parliament and Minister of State in the Ministry of Youth and Education, and to you, the members sitting in the House, and to the supporters sitting in the gallery. Politics is simply the most effective and efficient way for you to influence the type of country that you're comfortable with. And it's simple to understand when I use an American example, because those who are comfortable with guns, they will select to be a part of the Republican Party, and those who are not comfortable with guns will seek to be a part of the Democratic Party. And it extends to those who are comfortable with abortion and those who are not comfortable with abortion, those who are comfortable with taxes and those who are comfortable with low taxes. And so therefore, the type of country that you're comfortable with can be engineered by participating in the political process. And this House is the place that the policies that will then generate that country come to get life or come to die. And there are some policies that will come here, and many have heard, meet a natural death, and some that come and gain even greater legs to influence and impact that nation that you're comfortable with. And so it's an everlasting search for the right thing and the right way. That's very important, because many times we agree to the right thing, but we might disagree on the right way. And so we're not always as divided as is perceived on what the objectives are, but many times on what the strategies should be. Today you're given an opportunity to influence opinion, to influence thought, and to maybe influence policy. I ask that you take that seriously and don't feel nervous about being nervous, because we have all felt that way In fact, every time I stand to speak, I am nervous about what I might say incorrectly, which always still happens. But I'm saying to you, you'll do great. You're some of the brightest that we have in this nation. And I look forward to seeing some of you in Parliament, and I would say joining me on that side. But, but don't underestimate the work that must be done on this side. So I really want to thank the Ministry of Education, in particular the Minister in charge of the youth portfolio, my friend Floyd Green, for reigniting and regenerating an effort from government to giving youth an opportunity to experience what we do in Parliament. I hope you have a good day and good luck.
Thank you, Senator Crawford. And now we'll hear from the Honorable Floyd Green, Member of Parliament, Minister of State. Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable Pernell Charles, Speaker of the House, Senator Damian Crawford, our opposition spokesperson on Youth and Culture, Mr. Dean Roy Bernard, our Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Lady Heather Cook, Clerk of the House and staff of the Houses of Parliament, members of the Youth Advisory Council team led by Aubrey Stewart, of course, Member of Parliament Michael Phillips from Manchester, Ms. Jamie Ann Chavans from the National Integrity Action, members of the media, onlookers, but especially members of the National Youth Parliament. Good morning, everybody. You will first allow me to thank the Youth Advisory Council and the members of the Youth Division for really going above and beyond the call of duty to ensure that we are here today for another sitting of the National Youth Parliament. One of the exciting features of our Youth Parliament is that it is organized by youth themselves. And I think the gains that we have seen has come directly because we have so established it to ensure that our Youth Advisory Council plays a critical role. And I know Aubrey, I have to single him out and the team for special commendation. But it also would not have been possible were it not for the involvement of the Houses of Parliament and our partners, the National Integrity Action, who truly came in and did some wonderful training sessions for this Youth Parliament. And I ask the members of the Parliament to commend the National Integrity Action. Last year we launched our new National Youth Policy. And under that policy, it is said that our fourth goal is to maximize the participation of our youth in the decision making of our country. When we looked at what we did in 2016, we were excited that we had revitalized the Youth Parliament, but we wanted to do more. We wanted to ensure that you had a more meaningful engagement. And when we sat with our youth advisors, they said, Minister, let us rearrange the Parliament. So this Parliament is very special. It is the first time in our history that we actually have youth members of Parliament that were assigned to constituencies. Never happened before. It is also the first time in our history that you never started with your presentations. You had to serve in the field for a year before you would have made it to this house. And I think that in and of itself highlights what we want to get from this Youth Parliament. Being a member of Parliament is much more than just coming to Parliament and speaking on a Tuesday. Or even if you're a member of Senate, going in and making presentation to bills. What you were able to see is that being a member of parliament is truly about service. It's truly about going into communities, talking to the people, finding out their dreams, aspirations, and how you as representative can make that a reality. And I'm very happy that all of you, despite difficulty, you are able to pull together in your counties and to do projects which were worthwhile. So I know that the team from Middlesex came front and center with issues that parents go through in preparing for back to school, that children go through in getting themselves ready to take on a new school year. I know that the team from Cornwall was able to get a first-hand view of some of the challenges we have with our children who are wards of the state as they went into the Granville place of safety and had a wonderful engagement. And in St. Thomas, they not only took on the SDGs, but the team from Surrey went into our rural communities to treat with the issue of unemployment among our youth. So I fundamentally believe that you have come to recognize part of the job of a member of parliament. Now you're on to another phase. And this is an equally important phase, where you come into the House and you put forward your views. I want to assure you, this is not a talk shop. All of us that you see here, and even those who are not here, and I will use this opportunity to now apologize for Minister, the Honorable Roel Reid, who is presently at Cabinet, but as you see, is well represented here, not only at my level, but at the level of the Permanent Secretary, because we want to take note of the solutions that you have to offer. And I'm excited about the areas that you're going to cover, and I am here to tell you that coming out of this exercise, for the first time, I will table in Parliament a document that has all your recommendations, so that Parliament can take note of what the youth have to say. We will also be circulating the recommendations to the various ministries, and we will ask and task our new advisory council to be that entity that follows up on the recommendations that have been made emanating from this youth parliament. So with all that said, I look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to the contributions that you will make. As you know, we always ensure that we have a diverse youth panel and a diverse youth parliament. As such, I really want to say a special welcome to members from the deaf community and also members from the, absolutely, and members from our blind community, as we definitely ensure that we have an inclusive youth parliament. But the parliament is just one step in your journey. And I hope all of you recognize that you still have more to give and more to offer and more to go. So I hope you use this experience to truly level up your participation. Level up first starts with looking in self, seeing what you can do to make yourself a better individual. Then we want you to ensure that you look in community to see how you can level up, especially where you're from, especially those from rural Jamaica. You know, I have a little bias. But more importantly, level up is about making Jamaica a better place. And I hope that all of you will take this experience to move forward in making Jamaica a better place. And remember, Don't worry about the other side. We have space for you on my side.
Thank you, Minister Green. We'll now hear from the Honorable Pernell Charles, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Tavares Finson has stepped out with the Honorable Floyd Green, Minister of State, the Minister of Education and Information. Senator Damon Crawford, Opposition Spokesman on Youth and Culture. Other parliamentarian, I think Parliamentarian Phillips is representing the Leader of the Opposition. Members of the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica, members of the National Youth Parliament, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. If you were sitting there and looking here, and I was the one, I would be, all I'm saying is beauty. A conglomerate. And I'm not being disrespectful to beauty or to age, because I am a senior youth. I'm very pleased to see another sitting of the National Youth Parliament. And I'm pleased with the new configuration, which has made the sitting of Youth Parliament representing a culmination of a year of hard work. As someone who has served 50 years in the politics of this country, representing the people in this Parliament, in the Senate, and in the Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation, before any one of you were born. It is heartwarming to be surrounded by so many young, aspiring leaders. As a representative of the youth, it will be up to you to keep issues that matters to you, issues that affect daily lives of the people, at the forefront of your public thought. As parliamentarians, we look to you to provide guidance in this respect. It is necessary, therefore, that you speak with a clear and unified voice. It is necessary that you work together, that you support each other in working for what you deem to be the good of all. Please recognize that there is a generation change of leaders. New leaders born since independence are not bound by elements of the old order. Jamaica is depending on you to strengthen the features of our democracy. The interests of all the people must be paramount in your leadership. Cater to the majority while protecting the minority. Age and experience must guide the youth, but youth and energy must move forward. The Old Testament and the New Testament are there to guide us. You must recognize that the 21st century brings a generation of change. It must be that you are not bound by the politics of the past. The old-time politics of the past has caused a lot of problems. Our heroes of the past, national and local leaders, have done well, but the new generation must lift the bar, and we are depending on you to do that. Go forward without fear or favor. Do not be fearful of the future. For every sunset, there is a sunrise. Be not humbled by the challenges of the past. Seek new solutions. Do things differently. You're all born since independence. Debate national issues. Be persistent and respectful to one another. The objective must be to work, always remembering that the people you represent, serve, and speak for are listening, and they are the jury, and they hand down their decision in the next election. Cater to the majority, as I've said, by protecting the minority. Always remember that your judgment day is the next election. You must demand accountability. That is one thing that you must never compromise. Is if you're in a forum for real change, and I hope to see some of you get elected and come and sit as beautiful as you are, following the code of dress as in the standing orders. The whole parliament should come and see this beauty. Upgrade the standard of representation. Join the generation change. Respect the past, but do not necessarily be bound by the features of the past. Remember always, your foot may slip. You may regain your balance. But if your tongue slips, you can never recall the word. Let me repeat. You will slip and you may regain your balance. But if your tongue slips, you can never recall the word. As parliamentarians, you must be jealous of those who put you in parliament, jealous of their wishes. Work with it. And I call the word jealous because it is an attraction that you go to the people with. I want to congratulate those who have put this forum together, who have worked extremely hard. And I want to congratulate those of you who have come from all over Jamaica. I ask that you do not take this as an excursion, but as the beginning of something great for Jamaica. And may God guide you in your deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll now hear from Ms. Jamie Ann Shavans, and she's a Youth Outreach Officer at the National Integrity Action.
Senator the Honorable Thomas Tavares Finson, President of the Senate. Honorable Pernell Charles, Speaker of the House of Representatives. Honorable Floyd Green, Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. Senator Damian Crawford, Opposition Spokesperson on Youth. Mrs. Heather E. Cook, Clerk of the Houses. Mr. Dean Roy Bernard, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. Members of the Youth Advisory Council. National Youth Parliamentarians, media, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant morning. National Integrity Action is delighted to share in this, the 2018 sitting of the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica. The introduction of the NYPJ in 2016 was a move welcomed by the NIA, as we believe that such a program has great potential of engaging the youth of our nation in addressing issues of national importance. many of which are directly in line with the thrust of NIA to combat corruption and build integrity in Jamaica. Thank you. NIA's decision to continue our partnership with the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in execution of the NYPJ for the 2017-2018 year was one which was well worth taking. We were fully impressed by the proposed revamping of the program made by the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica and the subsequent endorsement by Minister Green and the implementation and execution by the ministry. The new approach of promoting a higher degree of accountability from the young people who put forward themselves as youth members of parliament by virtue of requiring that they engaged in actual representation of the youth of their assigned constituencies and completing county projects as a group prior to being elevated to this, perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime experience of sitting in the chambers of the House, where our national leaders converge to treat with the business of our people. We congratulate those of you who are sitting here today. If you have noticed, your numbers have dwindled. So you guys are the ones who have stayed the course and put in the work, right? So you can give yourselves a round of applause. We acknowledge that you have maintained your accountability and are reflecting a transparent set of youth who give credence to the reformed program. We thank you for allowing us to be part of your year's experience and look forward to hearing your recommendations today, but even more so, looking forward for your continued advocacy and work for them to actually bear fruit. And we pledge the support of National Integrity Action with and through our youth arm, Integrity Action Movement for Students, to the furtherance of your objectives, as we continue to forge partnerships and challenge the powers that be, combating corruption and building integrity in Jamaica on a non-partisan basis for the benefit of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Shavans. We'll now hear from Mr. Aubrey Stewart, Chairman of the Youth Advisory Council.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, special invited guests as adopted, youth members of parliament, members in the gallery, good morning. Now, one of the main objectives of the Youth Parliament was that we expose our youth leaders to active citizenship and active engagement within policy making and communication. But when the Youth Advisory Council came in office in 2016, we recognized that that objective was not being effectively achieved. So, after relentless discussions with the minister and the division, here we are sitting today, a reformed youth parliament. Now, so some of the aspect of the reform was already mentioned. Each member of parliament, each youth leader was assigned to a constituency. Each youth member of parliament was also assigned to a county in which a county project is completed. And I must take this opportunity to recognize the county advisors who did an amazing job in guiding youth parliament in completing those projects. Yes, you want the name? So, Stanisha Davis, Middlesex. Russell Barrett. Odell Marsh. Kamara Davis and other Youth Advisory Council members. Now, this is not the end for the Youth Parliament. This is not the end. So you may be wondering, okay, so it's 1 year of activities, 1 year of project, 1 year of engaging your communities. But as you depart from your 1 year of service, and as myself and Sean and other advisors depart from our service as youth advisors, we have something in store that will continue our work. So within this month, or ending Youth Month, we will be seeking to launch what is called the Youth Parliament Alumni. So the work that you have started in your constituencies and the work that you have started in your counties will certainly continue under this mandate. That's not it. That's not it. The other youth parliamentarians who would have served in the parliament years before us, you will have them as guidance so that whenever you have any other initiatives, those initiatives will be intensified by those who pass before us. So in closing, today is your day. I know that you're nervous a little bit, but don't be nervous. Remember that you represent all the young people that you see here in the chamber and all the young people here listening in Jamaica. Go forth, make your recommendations, and as we task the government to make changes in areas that we see and we deem very, very important. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. This Honourable House now resumes its sitting. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today is the following. Report on my experience at the 9th Commonwealth Youth Parliament during the period February 25th through to March 1st, 2018. Javon Reed, Deputy Speaker.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally. House Leader.
The Prime Minister intends to make a statement today. However, at a later stage, we will move for the recommittal of the item to enable her to make that statement prior to the adjournment of the sitting.
The question is that the item statements by ministers be recommitted. All in favor? Aye. All against? The ayes have it. Notices of motions given orally. Ms. Gaynor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, whereas the Prime Minister has the prerogative to cause the nation to go to the polls outside of the 5-year term of office as stipulated by the Constitution of Jamaica, and may do so without necessity but in pursuit of political advantage. And whereas the general public service has a stipulated age of retirement, but elected and appointed members of Parliament have no set age of retirement or term limits. And whereas the general and local government elections are held separately, both requiring similar high cost and related human resources for their facilitation, and whereas technology is presently underutilized in the electoral process, be it resolved that the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica debates the reformation of the electoral system in pursuit of Jamaica instituting fixed election dates, merging the local and general elections, intensifying the utilization of technology in the execution of elections, and effecting a more robust system of accountability, transparency, and youth participation. And be it further resolved that the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica facilitates the advancement of emerging recommendations from this debate to the Office of the Prime Minister for the government to consider and develop the necessary policies to effectively implement it. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to make this motion.
Ms. Elliott Williams.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, whereas there continues to be calls from various sectors of society regarding the need for successive governments to implement effective crime plans and utilize new and creative methods to address the issues which threaten Jamaica's national security. Be it resolved that the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica 2018 debates issues affecting national security, including issues such as psychosocial factors that lead to violence, peace building and rehabilitation, and the underutilization of technology in crime fighting and crime prevention. And be it further resolved that the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica facilitates the advancement of emerging recommendations for this debate to the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information for the government to consider and develop the necessary policies to effect implementation. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Ms. Mullings.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of this House, I will move, be it resolved that the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica 2018 debates the potential for the utilization of information and communication technology, ICT, in agriculture and education to propel economic growth and job creation in Jamaica. And be it further resolved that the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica facilitates the advancement of emerging recommendations from this debate to the Office of the Prime Minister for the government to consider and develop the necessary policies to effect implementation. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sitting of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. We will now hear from House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it is intended that we take 3 motions today for the debate. The motion regarding the reformation of the electoral system brought by the member from St. Ann Northeastern. The motion regarding issues of national security brought by the member from St. Catherine Central. And the motion regarding ICT in education and agriculture brought by the member from St. Thomas Eastern in the order which I have stated them. Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable the members to take the motions, notice of which was given earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the members to take the motions, notice of which they gave earlier. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. We'll now hear from the opposition spokesperson on culture, gender, entertainment and sports of the constituency of Northeast St. Anne, Ms. Davorine Gaynor.
Mr. Speaker, it has been 56 years post-independence and issues of corruption and ethical breaches within the governance system of Jamaica are still topical. This is a cause for concern. Even with over 12 government agencies established within the public sector to fight issues of corruption, facilitate transparency, and to hold responsible parties accountable, more clearly needs to be done. I humbly submit to this Honorable House that there needs to be a reformation of our political processes so as to remedy its issues with actionable and transparent measures that will curb corruption and regain the confidence and trust of our young people in the governance of this country. How can we actualize Vision 2030 if the young people in Jamaica have little to no confidence in a corruption-plagued governance system? The most recent data published by the 2017 Latin American Public Opinion Project indicates that Jamaica had the lowest percentage of voter turnout in the Western Hemisphere, and within that, the youth were among the lowest demographic group. International development partners, such as the World Bank and the European Union, have also shared concerns about the inadequacy of the existing regime and expect that the establishment of the single anti-corruption agency will go some way towards remedying this deficiency. A recommendation that was recently legislated in what we know today as the Integrity Commissions Act of 2017. Eradicating acts of corruption by such changes in the criminal justice system needs to be complemented by reforming the electoral process. These are not only areas of national priorities, but necessities for ensuring economic growth and development. This understanding derives from successive assessments of Jamaica by the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report. The 2017-2018 GCR records Jamaica's improvement in score and ranking internationally. However, it indicates that corruption remains one of the 3 most problematic factors for doing business in Jamaica. The National Security Policy of Jamaica 2016 validates this by stating that corruption is a Tier 1 threat and a clear and eminent danger to national development. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. We, the Youth Parliament of Jamaica, call for the Code of Political Conduct to be made into law and gazetted. Full time now we give teeth to this document. This is to consolidate penalties for persons who breach the Political Code of Conduct. In the political sphere, corruption impedes democracy and the rule of law. In a democratic system, public institutions will lose their legitimacy when they misuse their power to serve primarily private interests, more so than that of the public. And this has been our plight over the decades. The current political process has clearly lost the confidence of the majority of young people. And as we now face the negative consequences, such as a reduced interest in political participation, we need to take seriously the gradual increase in the percentage of Jamaicans who would abandon democratic methods so that today a majority, according to the Lap-Up report, would turn to military takeover to deal with crime and corruption. Mr. Speaker, this would be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. But that's where disillusionment is leading our people, primarily the young. In addition to making the Political Code of Conduct a law, the National Youth Parliament is calling for a transformation of the voting process that will appeal to our emerging generation and get on par with the digital age. These include merging the local and national elections, establishing fixed election dates, digitizing the voting process to appeal to the tech-savvy electorate, and implementing term limits and mandatory age of retirement for government officials. As such, the recommendations for reforming the electoral process will play a significant role in helping us as a nation to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly goal number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, goal 17, partnership for the goals, and goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, all translating into the country's national development plan, specifically goal number 3, to ensure a just and cohesive society for all.
We'll now hear from the Minister of Transport and Mining from the constituency of Hanover Eastern, Mr. Anthony Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, to add to this submission as it pertains to low voter turnout, as it pertains to the reformation of the electoral system, I will be using this platform on low voter turnout. Mr. Speaker, there is a constant decline in votes at our general and local polls, especially where youth are concerned. It is costing our country millions. According to the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, in the year of 2016, it cost taxpayers close to $700 million for the general elections and $1 billion for the local general elections. This, Mr. Speaker, is a waste of taxpayers' money. Again, with information from the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, it states that the period 2007 to 2016, votes at general elections declined by 13.09%, whilst local government elections for the same period declined by 9.86%. This, Mr. Speaker, must be addressed. Mr. Speaker, it has been proven that voter apathy, victimization by employers, and conduct of political representatives are factors that contribute to low voter turnout. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament recommends to this Honorable House that a committee be put in place to find solutions to end voter apathy, have policies that prosecute employers who victimize their employees from executing their democratic rights. Mr. Speaker, conduct of leaders, be them elected officials or political personalities, are driving away the people from the polls. Mr. Speaker, these are challenges that we, the Youth Parliament, must be resolved. They are wasting our country's resources and making it seem that our right to universal adult suffrage is of no means. Finally, what this House is recommending, Mr. Speaker, which will be expounded on, is having both elections simultaneously, finances and resources which will be saved, and also end low voter turnout with regards to electronic voting. Mr. Speaker, more people will exercise their democratic rights, as statistics mentioned earlier showed that general elections have a higher voter turnout than local elections. I thank you.
Ms. Jervian Johnson, Minister with a portfolio in the Office of the Prime Minister and Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation.
Mr. Speaker and members of the Honorable House, I'm here to present about the implementation of a performance evaluation system for members of Parliament, which could boost voter participation among youths, as well as strengthen accountability and transparency and re-establish trust between members of Parliament and citizens.
Many citizens openly expressed their concerns about the low voter turnout in the general elections held in 2016. At 47.72%, Jamaica experienced the lowest voter participation in history since independence. Though on the one hand, Mr. Speaker, this is a cause of concern, on the other hand, it can be an indication that the time is ripe for change in the way that we handle our business. Has the style of politics changed since universal adult suffrage to reflect the change in culture, mindset, and concerns of citizens, especially youths? In a February 27, 2016 Gleaner article entitled, "Youth Tell Why They Abstain," youth had this to say, and I quote, "I believe the biggest contribution I could have made to the democracy is to contribute to the low voter turnout, which send a message that we are dissatisfied with both major parties." And another, I quote, "I don't know about their policies and operations to make an informed decision. I believe the general lack of interest in voting among youth may be due to one of two things. Either members of parliament are not performing, or members in their constituency are not aware of their performance. Especially the younger generation no longer wants to vote for a particular party just because their mother or great-grandparents are affiliated with a particular side. People want to see real results. We often talk about substance over hype. Well, it is time to level up and give the people what they want in this current political climate. One way of achieving this, Mr. Speaker, is to implement a system where the performance of members of parliament can be evaluated, for example, using a balanced scorecard. This system would achieve two objectives. Firstly, increase the level of awareness, accountability, and transparency between members of parliament and citizens. Secondly, it will be a motivator to members of parliament to deliver on what they promised or else. In implementing this system, I will present just two of the many recommendations. Firstly, increase dialogue with the members of the constituency to establish what the key development needs are for different groups, including youths. Secondly, after the development needs are identified and documented, implement practical, sustainable, and workable solutions that address those areas that are of highest priority. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, if such a system is implemented, I'm confident that the interest of more people will be stirred and they will be motivated to go out and exercise their right to vote. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Antoinette Dennis from Manchester Central, opposition spokesperson in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information.
We're all aware that preparing for an election is no easy task, especially since it is critical to maintain the fundamental guiding principles of efficiency and transparency. Mr. Speaker, as it stands, our representatives have been known to call elections, not because it was necessary, but because the governing party was high in the polls or they thought the opposition was in disarray. Mr. Speaker, I would like for this honorable House to refer to the 2016 local government election as an example. For numerous persons, this announcement came out of nowhere. And this, Mr. Speaker, as reported by the Jamaica Observer on November 2016, took the electorate by surprise, giving them less than a month, the mere minimum time, to ensure that all was in place for the electoral process in keeping with statutory requirements. This saw the entity being hastened to complete a number of tasks that would generally require a significantly greater amount of time, tasks which include printing of nomination day lists and ballots for distribution and the procurement of other election material. And Mr. Speaker, not to mention the completion and recruitment and training of more than 30,000 election day workers. Mr. Speaker, this is simply unacceptable, especially with a process that already struggles tremendously to get the support and acceptance that it should, as seen by the consistently decreasing low voter turnout. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament's recommendation of a fixed election date has strong merit. It would give a greater level of assuredness to the political process and allow for the Electoral Commission of Jamaica to better prepare for the holding of the parliamentary vote. Mr. Speaker, many believe that this would be contrary to the spirit of democracy, but Britain has a fixed election date, and similarly, Mr. Speaker, Canada, one of the most powerful countries within the Commonwealth, has also implemented fixed election dates since May 2007. Outside of the Commonwealth, Mr. Speaker, the United States also hosts their presidential election on a fixed date, that is the second Tuesday of November every 4 years, all of which have been working successfully. As such, Mr. Speaker, it is not beyond the capacity of our elected representatives to craft a workable and similar structure for our country. Mr. Speaker, regrettably, the closest our country has come to introducing a similar framework or measure rather was through meager discussions in June 2008. And this move suffered tremendous setback when then Prime Minister was advised that a fixed date could only be implemented after a referendum on Section 64(2) and 65(2) rather of the Jamaican Constitution. Since then, Mr. Speaker, little to no work has been done. In closing, Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament submits that fixed election dates are not and should not be seen as merely revolutionary, but rather a sensible necessity. It allows for greater planning by the public, the electoral officers, and even our politicians, and will calm any leader tempted to put their interests above our country's.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. We'll now hear from Mr. Ronaldo Ramsey of the constituency of St. James Central, and he is the Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information.
Shambles. The selection of election dates is in shambles. The preparedness of polling stations is in shambles. The effective engagement of election day workers, Mr. Speaker, is in shambles. The overall hosting of our elections is in shambles. The announcement of the election date signals the start of the EOJ's race to facilitating an effective election. But can we make it? Is there enough time between the national and local government elections? Though the pressure grows, the EOJ starts the race, vetting, mobilizing, and training of election day workers, creation of ballots and ballot boxes, and the selection and preparation of polling stations. Mr. Speaker, let us not pretend that all is well. Planning of an election is no easy task, let alone to plan for both a national and a local government election, which are so close together. So the hosting, Mr. Speaker, of separate elections has proven to be extremely strenuous on the human resources of the EOJ. For fixed same-day elections to be efficient in Jamaica, Mr. Speaker, the timeline can be set for the elections of 2031. In doing same, we propose that the government does the following. 1. Revisit the feasibility paper that the EOJ submitted to them years ago. We really need to be hearing what happened with that document. Amends the Municipality Act, the Parish Council Act, the Kingston and St. Andrew Cooperation Act, and the Representation of the People Act to form the legislative framework for these new processes. Changes the local government tenure to match the stipulated constitutional period of the national government tenure at 5 years. The creation of 2 color-coded ballots and color-coded ballot boxes, one for local government elections, local government votes, and another for national votes. We also propose the extension of the time between announcement of candidates and nomination day while also the extension between the period of announcement of the election date and the date of the actual elections. But how can we have an efficient electoral process or effective elections if our people are not informed? So, Mr. Speaker, we propose that the government hosts public education campaigns and forums through the training of citizens on the intricacies of fixed same-day voting. And we ask that you really, as the government, engage more, collaborate more with the EOJ and the ECJ. Mr. Speaker, the EOJ and ECJ have already shown the tremendous benefits that we can reap from such a well-needed change. South Africa has already implemented same-day elections as seen in the 2014 polls. Even here in Jamaica, right here at home, the electorate of Portmore elected both their mayor and member of parliament at the same time, and that was successful. All we need to do now is to replicate this on a national level. Mr. Speaker, our current electoral process are breadway. Let us, Mr. Speaker, move from shambles to efficiency. Let us take the steps in the right direction to safeguard the electoral process or efficient electoral process of Jamaica by 2031. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. We'll now hear from Mr. Donovan Hanson Jr. from the St. James West Central constituency, and he is the Minister of Finance and the Public Service.
Mr. Speaker, members of this noble house, it seems rather impossible to host a credible election in this day and age without reforming the electoral system. We have heard about the logistical issues and the personnel issues, but what about the costs? I'm going to tell you as Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, the call is simply this. We ask our policymakers to seriously consider, merging both general and local government elections to alleviate the burden on the hard-working taxpayers of our beloved country. Mr. Speaker, it is well documented that in 2016 the country spent $2 billion in hosting 2 elections. The general election costed the country $700 million, and the local government election a whopping $1.3 billion. These figures came from then Director of Elections, Mr. Oric Fisher. Conversely, the President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Warren McDonald, at the time, he stated in collaboration with the ECJ that if both elections were merged, the country, this beloved country, our taxpayers, us, we would have saved $1.5 billion. Mr. Speaker, the National Youth Policy of Jamaica 2017 to 2030 highlights 6 goals which the ministry hopes to achieve by 2030. This $1.5 billion could have been reinvested in youth policy projects. Mr. Speaker, make it very clear, the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica will not be silent on this issue, and we will be working to ensure we'll be working to ensure that our voices ring out as loud as the bell, and our policymakers hear our cry today. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the Representation of the People Act of 2015, which speaks to reforming financing political parties, and move that amendments be made to this act to address merging both elections. Mr. Speaker, our stance is clear, and it is rather explicit. Our leaders need to stop destroying our country with these fiscally irresponsible acts. We urge our policymakers that the next time the country goes to the polls, which is 2021 constitutionally due, that the long-suffering taxpayers of this country are given a break, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, We hope that the measures implemented by our policymakers will ultimately balance the books and balance our collective lives. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, we urge our stakeholders to join the call with us. It is simply this: let us move forward in wholeness and use our Phillips screwdriver to tackle the movement of our beloved country. Mr. Speaker, members of this House, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. We'll now hear from Kevon Knight of the Manchester North West Division, and he is the opposition spokesperson on national security.
Mr. Speaker, consider this. An individual who was born in Montego Bay but currently resides in Kingston in our current electoral system would be required to return home to vote. This affects youth participation in the voting process, making it stagnant as a result of the inconvenience it poses. It is imperative that we improve mechanisms of voting which will ensure time and cost efficiency. This youth parliament proposes that e-voting be explored as means of addressing the various challenges faced in our current electoral process. E-voting, according to Margaret Roos 2011, is an election system that allows a voter to record his or her secure and secret ballot electronically. In 2004, it is estimated that approximately 30% of the voting population in the United States used some form of e-voting technology, including direct electronic recorders, DER, touchscreens or optical scanners to record their vote. Mr. Speaker, e-voting, despite its potential for identity theft and electronic ballot manipulation, can be introduced and effectively worked if proper project planning and system development occurs paired with rigorous risk assessments and audits during and after the implementation stages. Mr. Speaker, this youth parliament believes that e-voting will spur the interests of Jamaicans. It is one, and time efficient. 2, maintains secrecy of voting. 3, fosters accountability. And 4, will facilitate diasporic participation using the kiosk electronic system at Jamaican embassies worldwide. Additionally, immobile voters who will be provided access to mobile polling stations to vote. With e-voting, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica will join many countries in the world like Brazil, Venezuela, Canada, Estonia, who have relatively good voter participation. All of these countries have thriving electronic voting systems that stand at the forefront of the electronic voting movement. We recommend, Mr. Speaker, that the government through eGov, with the assistance of the Electoral Office of Jamaica and EVBIS, adopts the procedure of 1, testing, 2, implementing, and 3, maintaining e-voting hardware and software, which will in turn eradicate the printing of ballots, saving millions, if not billions, of Jamaican dollars, which could be used and allocated to youth development. The reformation of the electoral system will allow the government the opportunity to receive the true representation of the people to serve them accordingly, while citizens will hold the government accountable for their actions, functions, and performance. With this said, Mr. Speaker, I rest.
We'll now hear from the opposition spokesperson on finance from the constituency of Westmoreland West, Mr. Davion Hemmings.
Mr. Speaker, just the thought of technology being used in voting in Jamaica brings a sense of pride in the technological advancement towards our country. However, it is time to convert the idea to action, Mr. Speaker. The The Youth Parliament believes it is time to act strategically towards the sustainable development by incorporating the use of technology in our electoral process by implementing electronic voting, e-voting as it is called. E-voting will increase effectiveness, increase credible paper trail, reduce human error, that is challenges within the ballot counting, reduce manpower, and improve efficiency in casting ballots, Mr. Speaker. All of these will lead to the reduction in the overall spending of our elections, the increase in efficiency in the execution, and most importantly, the integrity of the process. The Electoral Office of Jamaica has implemented the Electronic Voter Identification and Ballot Issuing System, EVBIS. But, Mr. Speaker, with EVBIS, registered electors will identify and be verified at the polling station by using their fingerprints, after which the system will issue authenticated ballots for voting. The main objective of this, Mr. Speaker, is to 1, prevent impersonation of an elector, 2, multiple voting by persons, and 3, the use of unauthenticated ballots in the electoral system. We, the members of Youth Parliament, therefore duly recommend that we explore and implement a system to our electoral process in the form of electronic mobile kiosks, not only in the diaspora, but here in our country. In an article by the Jamaica Observer dated January 2015, the title Digital Smartphone Users Surpass 1 Million Users, Digital announced a 20% growth in the last 3 months of 2014. Mr. Speaker, with such advancement in telecommunication industry and growth through the usage of smartphones, internet access and technology can be exploited in the implementation of iVoting. Mr. Speaker, let it be known that iVoting is a system that allows voters to cast their ballots from an internet-connected computer anywhere in the world. Imagine the astounding effect that iVoting can cause on the democratic process in Jamaica and increase voter turnout utmost importantly amongst our youth. So, Speaker, the side of the House understand and is aware of the conversation that may arise to effect such implementation. We are aware, Mr. Speaker, that the conversation of our national identification system needs and the establishment of the National Identification Registration Authority, NIRA, are deemed necessary. The successful implementation of this program will see a smooth implementation of e-voting / iVoting. Their successful implementation of this program throughout the world. So, Speaker, external voting over the internet is very straightforward. Like all the other digital services in the country, the internet voting is made possible via the Estonian ID or mobile ID that enables secure remote authentication and legal binding digital signature. So, Speaker, finally, all of this cannot be done and efficiently implemented without needs and the establishment of NIRA, which will see the enrollment and registration of all citizens of this country.
Thank you, Mr. Hemmings. Before we proceed, I'd like for us to acknowledge the presence of Senator the Honorable Pernell Charles Jr., Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We'll now hear from the opposition spokesperson on transport and mining from the St. Elizabeth Northeast constituency, Dominic Blair.
Mr. Speaker, since we're in the business of reforming the electoral system by proposing fixed election dates and a merger of general and local government elections, we must also be open to implementing term limits and mandatory ages of retirement for people who offer themselves to be servants of the state. Mr. Speaker, the Mr. Speaker, the Constitution notes that the candidate in running at the general or local government post must be a citizen of Jamaica or any Commonwealth territory who is a resident in Jamaica, must be at least 21 years old, having no sentence of death or imprisonment, and the candidate must be of sound mind, Mr. Speaker. But the Constitution does nothing to tell us who can run and how long a candidate can serve in political office. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution notes the age at which judges and other civil servants must retire, but it does not speak to our candidates in political office. Mr. Speaker, if we address this problem, Mr. Speaker, we can be in a better state to govern our nation's business through the inclusion of global trends as they are generational changes. Mr. Speaker, if we limit the term of service of our political representatives, we can ensure that new candidates who are trained and prepared for service can also serve as political representatives. And that insight and governance strategies are regenerated as time progresses. Mr. Speaker, the 22nd Amendment of the United States Constitution notes that no one may be elected as President of the United States for more than 2 terms. Also, Mr. Speaker, many states in the United States have ratified term limits serving at the state level as a governor. Mr. Speaker, in Canada, one of our Commonwealth neighbors, senators must retire at the age of 75 years old. Mr. Speaker, as the Public Service Pensions Act outlines that all public servants must retire at that age, 65 years old, and pension is levied based on terms of service. We move, Mr. Speaker, that political representatives are added to the political public service bill to add a smooth transition to solve our call for a mandatory retirement age. Mr. Speaker, we therefore submit to the government that there be a term limit of 2 terms or 10 years consecutively in our Jamaican context for the Prime Minister of Jamaica and a mandatory retirement age for members of Parliament and senators at the age of 75 years old. We would, Mr. Speaker, have to amend our Representation of the People Act to show the needed amendment which we submit today. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, if we are truly to be in the business of the reformation of our electoral system, we must pass these bills that limit the tenure of a candidate and the mandatory age of retirement of our political servants to truly reform our governance for the benefit of the ones that we serve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To reiterate, Mr. Speaker, reformation of the electoral processes, if executed within a legal framework that supports accountability and transparency, will definitely increase voter turnout and participation of the young people in Jamaica. I would like to thank the members for their contribution on the motion, as their recommendations are feasible and strategic for the advancement of our country without leaving anyone behind. Fixing the election dates to allow effective preparation for the processes, merging the local and national elections to reduce the financial strain on the country, digitizing the electoral process to reduce voter apathy and increase participation through convenience, accessibility, and identification, and to make mandatory the age of retirement for political representatives with set term limits. Mr. Speaker, we the young people of Jamaica have spoken, and as such we look forward to the advancement of our recommendations by asking that such a motion be approved.
The question is that the motion on the reform of the electoral systems be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. We now move to the constituency of St. Catherine Central, where the Honorable Attorney General, Ms. Brittany Elliott Williams, will address us.
Mr. Speaker, we will be opening this debate by discussing the second major thematic area, which is issues of national security. I and the Minister from Southwest St. Anne will make recommendations today concerning the implementation of preventative methods to curb violent behavior in children by using a psychosocial approach. Thereafter, you will hear submissions on the topic of peace building and rehabilitation, which focuses on the implementation of pre-crime initiatives to reduce the current crime rate. And finally, Mr. Speaker, you will hear submissions on the underutilization of modern technology in crime fighting and crime prevention, and the ways in which the government may improve the deficiencies which currently exist. Mr. Speaker, on my first official visit as YMP for Central St. Catherine, it properly placed into perspective for me the difficulties faced within that community. When I arrived into the capital of Spanish Town, I saw men from the Jamaica Defense Force, huge bulletproof tankers patrolling the streets, and members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force were cordoning sections of the city. Mr. Speaker, this was because a young woman had been shot dead in the middle of the day in broad daylight. Same thing. One taxi operator, Mr. Speaker, a man named Douglas, he told me that the people of Spanish Town are usually left to die at the hands of gunmen. He told me that the police would usually arrive on the scene to do the mere cleanup after an incident of violence, and this particular day was no exception. Mr. Speaker, the most frightening part for me was that the people were calm and they went about their daily activities. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament understands that many of the issues experienced in poor communities are institutional and would therefore require the collaborative efforts of a political, cultural, and economic shift to improve the living conditions for persons within these communities. And it's for this reason that I must first commend the government for working tirelessly to develop legal and other infrastructural framework to clamp down on the rampant criminality that exists in pockets of the nation. However, Mr. Speaker, Douglas described to me a state that was leaving some of its most vulnerable people behind. The government is in the process of actualizing Vision 2030, and the Youth Parliament believes that it is therefore imperative that everyone is given the tools to participate in this journey. Mr. Speaker, no more can this state leave the vulnerable behind. One such tool that the Youth Parliament recommends that the government uses is a psychosocial approach as a preventative measure to curb violent behavior in children, so as to train them to become the leaders of tomorrow. Psychosocial behavior, it can be defined as the thoughts and actions that an individual will display because of how he or she is influenced by their social environment. Psychosocial behaviors differ across individuals, and it may contribute to the development or aggravation of a mental or physical disorder. Currently, Mr. Speaker, there are parenting workshops with the aim of reducing the risk of violent behavior in children. However, these programs are fragmented and they haven't been made accessible to all. These programs have been provided by the Child Development Agency, the CDA, the National Family Planning Board, the NFPB, and UNICEF Jamaica, among others, who have done great work, but we believe that more can be done. Mr. Speaker, a child's first classroom is the home, and therefore tackling the issue of poor parenting is of national priority. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament believes that there should be a reformation in the method in which parents are trained. We recommend that a mobile app should be created as a centralized source of online parenting workshop and a discussion forum to exchange ideas and best practices on child rearing. This app would act as a centralized hub to provide a space to learn to learn and to get access to childhood professionals, including teachers, healthcare practitioners, and social workers. The app would also provide a digital safe space, Mr. Speaker, for the sharing of ideas and recommendations for parents or persons wanting to gain more knowledge of how to better interact and train children. The Youth Parliament further recommends that the government engage with young entrepreneurs for the creation of the app. Mr. Speaker, I would invite you to imagine a platform where 16-year-old Sasha, who is pregnant, and by virtue of that, she's discriminated and abandoned by our society. Or for a young man, or rather a first-time father, Trevor, who is nervous about being a first-time father, having a newborn. Both getting the guidance they need wherever on the island they are, in the comfort of their homes. Mr. Speaker, in closing, Jamaica is filled with young, ambitious, well-driven, and capable youths who, because of their environment and social standing, are simply not given the opportunity to actualize their fullest potential. And if Vision 2030 is to become a reality, we, the Youth Parliament, strongly urge our governmental officials to lead us all into this future of development. And the training of parents in a smarter, more technologically advanced way is one recommended way to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General. We'll now like to acknowledge former Member of Parliament who is with us today, Mr. Raymond Price. Now move to the Minister of Labour and Social Security from the St. Anne Southwest constituency, Ms. Latricia Hall.
Mr. Speaker, I've been grappling with this issue for quite some time now. My friend, my schoolmate, we're talking the journey throughout primary school and secondary. Just a little walk from where I live. Her body was found hanging from an ackee tree in her yard. Can you imagine how disturbing this was, opening the image that was sent to me on WhatsApp? Mr. Speaker, she was a victim of depression caused by cyberbullying. This is why, Mr. Speaker, we should take mental health very seriously in Jamaica. How Jamaicans treat mental health with scant regard has become an eyesore. This is why psychiatric nursing aides in 2016 reasoned that if we continue to disregard mental health, the number of mentally ill persons could double in 10 years. Mr. Speaker, I am speaking on the youth who faces these issues, on the behalf of the youth who face these issues. We need to take a psychological approach to address violent behavior in children. The Youth Parliament submits a mandatory mental health screening conducted as a part of the medical examinations that students are required to take at all levels of education. Mental health screenings are the quickest and easiest way to determine whether a person is experiencing symptoms of a mental health condition. This may be able to save a life. A Jamaica Observer article dated June 29, 2018 states that there's a mental health crisis among adolescents aged 14 to 17, and the problem is further compounded by a shortage of mental health specialists in the public sector to deal with the affected children. Mr. Speaker, the youth are the vision of this country, and a country without a vision shall surely perish. Chief Executive Officer of the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, Rosalie Gage Gray, urged that this is a serious mental health crisis and it's affecting our adolescents in the country, and there are not sufficient resources in the public sector to attend to these issues that the children present. Mr. Speaker, we need more social workers. We need more clinical social workers. We need more clinical social social workers and psychologists because the issues that the children are presenting require staff of a certain level of capacity to be able to address them. In studies of school-based mental health screenings, researchers found that mental health screening played an important role in reducing barriers to learning. It provides youth with access to service for mental health care, which results in positive educational and behavioral outcomes. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament submits that the government of Jamaica implements screening as a mandatory attachment of mental health assessments, and we recommend that this begins at the early childhood stage. In concluding, Mr. Speaker, I will remind the House that the Youth Parliament believes that in order for there to be a greater reduction in crime from the psychosocial approach, we need to, 1, invest in our clinical psychologists, and 2, level up in making it mandatory for all students at all levels of education to participate in mental health screenings as a part of their school medical examinations. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Now from the constituency of St. Catherine North Central, the Prime Minister, Ms. Shakira Douglas.
Plagued by the monster of violence. It has been such a plague that no one man can pinpoint a sustainable solution. I will not expend the House's time going over statistics as to possible reasons as to why violence is persistent, because we have all been affected. Just this year, myself and members of this youth parliament suffered at the hands of gunmen who held us up in a taxi. We lost more than material things on this day, Mr. Speaker. Our sense of security was troubled. It is this persistent, violent invasion of our space that inspired the need to address peace building and rehabilitation. Considering this, the Youth Parliament formally submits that our crime-fighting efforts allocate for rehabilitating our incarcerated youth because, Mr. Speaker, young unchecked juveniles grow into big criminal masterminds. Mr. Speaker, the resounding cry of our juvenile correctional facilities is 1, lack of monetary resources, 2, limited human resource, 3, infrastructural inadequacies. These cries are not new, Mr. Speaker, but they absolutely cannot continue. On this basis, I will submit 3 recommendations. Firstly, the Corrections Act of 2004. It does not state anywhere in the Act what it means for juvenile rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, I submit that the Corrections Act be amended to state specific activities that must be carried out in the rehabilitation process. We need to legislate our juvenile rehabilitation program. This program should cater to the holistic rehabilitation of the child, teaching them the value of work and addressing their mental state with therapy sessions. Here is also a perfect opportunity to create a niche for child psychologists. Yes. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, let us look at the country of Albania. In cases of minor offenses, specially trained officers conduct mediation sessions with the wards. Mr. Speaker, I submit that the same police officers who patrol our streets in search of hardened criminals cannot be the same officers that detain our juveniles. Under this model, there is also an option for the family of the offender to make some financial compensation to the victim. This, Mr. Speaker, would teach our youth another avenue of conflict resolution. The lesson here is not paying your way out of a crime, but talking it out instead of fighting it out. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we formally submit that the resources be reallocated, giving more credence to social interventions. Violence is not just actions. We must acknowledge that behind every heinous crime, there is a man that has been wired to react violently, and we have to put the necessary framework in place to address that mental software. The answers are within our country, Mr. Speaker. Let us take on the task of finding them, for there is nothing wrong with us that cannot be fixed with what is right with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. At this time, the House will entertain the presentation from the member representing Kingston Western, who is the Minister of National Security, Mr. Nefu Charlton.
Positive.
Mr. Speaker, in order to build peaceful communities, we must consider young people as partners for peace. When youth have safe spaces to engage without fear of discrimination, they have a better chance to contribute to peace, national security, and social cohesion. Mr. Speaker, according to the United Nations Security Council Progress Study and Resolution 2250, a thematic resolution that deals with the topic of youth from an international peace and security perspective, youth are important, if not indeed the most important stakeholders in peace building. Mr. Speaker, as Youth Member of Parliament for Kingston Western and Country Coordinator for the Commonwealth Youth Peace Ambassadors Network, we have identified youth from across Jamaica at the very grassroots level that are willing to serve as ambassadors for peace. Mr. Speaker, against that, we, the Youth Member of Parliament, put forward the following recommendations to the House. Mr. Speaker, through partnership that youth peace ambassadors be selected and trained in human rights to improve their advocacy in peace building, social cohesion, conflict resolution, and violence prevention. Mr. Speaker, this will empower our young people to be direct mechanisms of change in their communities, along with support from the Government of Jamaica, National Integrity Action, Citizen Security and Justice Program, and the Violence Prevention Alliance, among other key stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, it is time that we take youth participation and views into account when making decisions, from negotiation and prevention of violence to peace agreement, state of emergency, and a dedicated allocation within the yearly budget directed at peace building initiatives. Because, Mr. Speaker, our actions, although simple, contribute significantly to the construction and manufacture of peace. Mr. Speaker, what more could one say to the diaspora than, come home, come home. You have a safe place to retire. Mr. Speaker, we also recommend that a mandatory education curriculum be drafted and specifically implemented, focused on human rights as it relates to peace building at the primary and secondary level. Mr. Speaker, members of this House, we the youth members of Parliament urge that this government not just prioritize, not just publicize, but prioritize and allocate funding for long-term initiatives that focus on youth involvement in peace building, thus Jamaica becoming the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business.
Thank you, Honourable Member Charlton. This time we'll proceed to accept the submission from the Honourable Member Sheena Gay Richards, Youth Member of Parliament representing St. Andrew Southern, who serves this House as the opposition spokesperson on science, energy, and technology.
Mr. Speaker, as a youth residing in South St. Andrew, violence is a dilemma and there's a decline in community-unity relations. Let us look at the gruesome killing of 14-year-old Yatania Francis, who lived just meters from me and whose body was found just meters from her home. That morning, having gone to the location where her body was found and hearing persons say they could hear the piercing screams and smelled her body burning, the question is, where is the community? While we appreciate the implementation of a state of emergency to prevent and increase violence and social initiatives, we implement that social initiatives be implemented. Firstly, let us look at amplifying models such as Unite for Change, which was introduced to rekindle hope among Jamaicans and convince law-abiding citizens that they are not helpless, but can overcome the fear that has immobilized them by working together as a united front against crime. Secondly, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the Doha Declaration, promoting a culture of lawfulness 2017, outlined that the issue of prison-based rehabilitation is a complex one. While prisoners typically face a range of social, economic, and personal challenges that may complicate their social reintegration into society, the vast majority of prisoners will eventually be released and return to society. In order to reduce reoffending, it is therefore crucial to actively prepare prisoners for their successful resettlement in society through both prison-based programs and post-release support. I submit that Sections 32 and 33 of the Corrections Act 2004 be amended to reflect definitions of work and labor to include, but not be limited to, the infrastructural development of countries. In Norway, prisoners tend to sheep, cows, and chicken, or grow fruits and vegetables. They work in the stables and even on ground maintenance. This, Mr. Speaker, will deter inmates from committing further deviant acts, and most importantly, encourage our youth to seek and explore opportunities of employment instead of violence. Let my lasting charge be that we need to effect change. Let us reintegrate to combat crime in our country. The National Youth Parliament suggests that we not only intensify programs that exist, but also amend our laws to reflect strong regulation. We must do this with youth as an integral part of the mission. I thank you.
Thank you, Member Richards. We'll proceed to accept the submission from Youth Member of Parliament Abigail Roden, representing the constituency of St. Catherine Northwest. She serves this honorable house as the Deputy House Leader and Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation.
Mr. Speaker, crime in Jamaica has evolved from the use of guns and knives only to highly organized, heavily powered, and technologically savvy criminal networks. This therefore means that our crime prevention strategies need to move at a faster speed. The underutilization of modern technology in crime prevention is an issue of national security. Mr. Speaker, by 2021, the Ministry of National Security seeks to employ JAMPO-STATS, which utilizes a geographic information system map designed to capture, store, analyze, and manage geographic data that will help with enabling more predictive and preventative policing. We can liken it to Google Maps. The budget allocation to the Ministry of National Security for the fiscal year 2018 to 2019 has increased by 23.4%, moving to $78.5 billion. With this budget allocation in mind, this honorable House calls for the fast track of the fully operational JAMPO-STATS by November 11, 2019. As a Google Maps for criminal is imperative to aid the security forces in crime prevention. Mr. Speaker, a visit to any police station in the county of Middlesex will reveal that statements are recorded in an oversized exercise book. The Youth Parliament of Jamaica submits to the government that there needs to be proper digitization of station management records. This will ensure that police officers can take and sign statements in addition to analyze and review cases with the use of modern technology. It's time to level up. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted, if we do not empower and equip the ones who daily fight for us with the necessary tools to carry out their task, then our policies and acts are in vain. The youth believe that though there are members of the security forces who bring disgrace to the post they hold, there are still great members in our security forces. Mr. Speaker, my father is a police officer, and while he was on frontline duty many nights, I feared that he would not make it home because something horrible would happen while he's defending the citizens of our nation. Mr. Speaker, we must understand that the members of the security forces are spouses, daughters, sons, mothers, and fathers. They are human, they put their lives on the line, and they deserve respect. In concluding, Mr. Speaker, this honorable House strongly implores the government to implement our submissions to ensure that Jamaica is in line with Goal 16 of the Sustainable Development Goals and to guarantee that Jamaica is a safe place to live, to work, to raise families, and do business in line with Vision 2030. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy House Leader. We'll proceed with the business of the House to hear the submission from the opposition spokesperson and justice and youth member of parliament representing St. Andrews Rural, Mr. Jonathan Dwyer.
Mr. Speaker, in 2017, our country recorded 1,616 too many murders. Yes. And we have a serious crime problem that goes far beyond murder and violent crimes, but extends to crimes that are technologically and logistically sophisticated, such as drug trafficking and lottery scamming. Now, though there has been gradual progression in the use of technology in the perpetration of crimes, there is no commensurate use of technology by the authorities to fight it. We are, however, not without hope. The government of Jamaica has identified national security as one of its main strategic priorities and has increased funding to the Ministry of National Security. The ministry has been very active in initiating the leveling up of the Jamaica Constabulary Force by announcing plans to roll out a suite of software tools to be used by the force by 2021. The Youth Parliament, Mr. Speaker, applauds the government for regarding ICT initiatives. However, more needs to be done by way of incorporating technology beyond the software used and data captured for information analysis. We are not downplaying, Mr. Speaker, the need for information as it is clearly critical. But the use of technology must not be limited to ICT, as the full curtailment of crime requires safe and efficacious tools and machinery at our forces' disposal. It is on this premise, Mr. Speaker, that we call on the government to, in recognizing the problem of the overuse of deadly force by some members of our security forces, to allocate funds for the investment in non-lethal weapons such as tasers and blunt impact projectile rounds, which will aid in the suppression of crime without the lethal side effects. Mr. Speaker, the days of gun and baton only are over. Now on to the ever problematic area of road safety and security. We propose that the government install high-speed cameras at major thoroughfares and at crash hotspots with the sole purpose of capturing the plates of speeding motorists. Once a violation is captured, Mr. Speaker, speeding tickets will be sent to the offender, accompanied by a time-stamped photograph of the violation in question, so there is no doubt as to whether the crime was committed. To be clear, this measure should supplement and not substitute for manned speed traps or spot checks. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we call on the government to broaden the capacity of the Jamaica Eye Initiative by fast-tracking the operationalization and mobilization of Jamaica Eye connected cameras with the investment in a small fleet of specialized drones which will be used for active scene surveillance. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that although we laud the government for its efforts regarding the use of ICT to assist in crime fighting, it is only one side of the equation. The strong right hand of information remains the practical tools that are in our officers' hands and are at their disposal, and the underutilization of cutting-edge tools and machinery will continue to render our efforts to suppress crime inadequate. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We'll proceed to accept the submission from the Youth Member of Parliament representing Central Westmoreland, Tajwin Marshall.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat other than my own.
Proceed, member.
Mr. Speaker, it was Dean Carmen, an American inventor, who said every once in a while a new technology and an old problem and a big idea turn into an innovation. Mr. Speaker, that problem is crime. And the opposition here today believes that modern technology is important in crime fighting and crime prevention. Mr. Speaker, per the data provided by the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, stated, this country possesses a young and vibrant population, one that shows the longevity of this nation, and it is on this premise that Youth Parliament must champion the usage of technology in all aspects of our society. Mr. Speaker, perhaps it is a belief that technology is the least in a pool of possible ways to combat crime. But I will call for us to reflect on the country nestled in Northern Europe called Estonia. Estonia, Mr. Speaker, faced the world's first wide-scale cyber attack in 2007 when 58 of its websites went dark. Mr. Speaker, that prompted them to act. In acting, Estonia created for themselves an advanced e-governance and a safe space re-cybersecurity. Mr. Speaker, Estonia's success is stated in a review on eestonia.com is largely contributed to 1, reliable digital identity, 2, mandatory security baseline, and 3, an intense participation in international cooperation. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament of Jamaica would like to have the successes of Estonia, and so we choose to act. As such, we put forward the following recommendations. That 1, the Stay Alert app be transformed to encompass a system equipped with the ability to send alerts regarding issues of emergency and sending security issues to mobile users without access to data. Like the Amanda Alert in some states in the United States of America, we could tailor our very own Ananda Alert that would send inescapable messages only voided when one views that message itself. Mr. Speaker, that there be a mandatory form of identification. This would help Jamaica Eye, as Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament calls for facial recognition. And as such, Mr. Speaker, we ask for Jamaica Eye to be in every public space in Jamaica. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we call for reliable police vehicles equipped with GPS technology, giving dispatchers the ability to link nearby response vehicles with the caller. This, Mr. Speaker, would need proper government servers and funding for its fortification. Like Estonia, Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament is willing to act, and act here, Mr. Speaker, is attacking crime through technology. Thank you.
Well received. Thank you, Honourable Member. We'll proceed with the business of this House to accept the closing statement from our Attorney General, Ms. Brittany Elliott Williams.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard the recommendations of the youth members in tackling the issue of national security. Their recommendations to use a psychosocial approach to curb violent behavior in children by implementing an online platform that acts as a workshop to develop parents with assistance, or rather with assisting youths, or rather, there are recommendations to use a psychosocial approach to curb violent behavior in children by implementing an online parenting workshop developed with the assistance of youth coding entrepreneurs and the use of mandatory mental health screening for all students. Thereafter, Mr. Speaker, we heard submissions on peace building and rehabilitation, which focused on the implementation of pre-crime initiatives. There were calls for legislative amendments of our Corrections Act of 2004 with specific focus on juvenile rehabilitation, establishing youth peace ambassadors, and the reintegration of programs that facilitate building community unity. And finally, Mr. Speaker, you heard submissions on the underutilization of modern technology in crime prevention and fighting, and the ways in which the government may improve upon the deficiencies that presently exist. Mr. Speaker, you have heard the cries of the Youth Parliament, and we humbly ask that the motion be approved.
The question is that the motion on issues of national security be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. We'll now proceed to accept presentations on the motion having to do with ICT and its potential for economic growth and job creation in the areas of education and agriculture. This time I'll invite the member representing St. Thomas Eastern and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Mr. Shauna Mullings.
Mr. Speaker, today I stand for Jamaica's greatness as a country poised to be globally competitive through the use of information and communication technology as a driver for economic growth and job creation in the areas of agriculture and education. The Inter-American Development Bank revealed in 2017 that the unemployment rate stood at 29.6%, which was almost double the national unemployment rate. According to local employers, young people do not have the necessary skills to get and keep a job. We cannot continue with such a reality. The unemployment rate has been trending down each quarter since 2018, according to the Statistical Institute of Jamaica. But more work is required, as some youth recorded as employed are only working on short-term programs. As a part-time lecturer for the Heart Trust NTA for a few years, I see the need for sustainable employment for every single Jamaican youth through the eyes of my students. Every one of them matters. So let us take them beyond the use of ICT through Instagram and Twitter to explore ICT's ubiquitous nature and the propensity to give them a life that is better. With the current shifting in our education system, where we have introduced the primary exit profile and mathematics school-based assessment, the tablet in schools project, and so on, it is obvious that the government has smelt the coffee. But it's time to go beyond just smelling coffee. However, technology should not be treated as a vitamin such that we operate that its mere presence in schools will catalyze better educational outcomes. Hence, the technology vitamin must be utilized in a manner that bridges gaps. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament suggests to this Honorable House 3 movements to bridge the gaps and level up the education system so that we can roll Jamaica's boat towards global competitiveness. Bridge number 1, Mr. Speaker, school partnerships. ICT should be used as an enabler to reduce digital gaps and allow access in an equitable manner where schools with more resources and greater strengths in ICT should share with less advanced schools. Imagine with me, Mr. Speaker, Campion College in Kingston sharing a math lesson with Robert Lightburn High School in St. Thomas from their computer lab in real time. This is how we level up the education system. Bridge number 2, Mr. Speaker, partnerships with technology-based social enterprises so we can bridge the digital divide where we're getting more devices and still fall short in preparing graduates for the global market. We propose a more strategic and deliberate approach where the Ministry of Education delineates and shares the needs in the sector in a public database so as to support entrepreneurs to target their product development to solving emerging educational needs. Yes, there is EduFocal and other education-based entrepreneurs aligned with the ministry. However, as a social entrepreneur myself, having founded Next Step Lifelong Educational Services, I propose a more strategic collaboration where Jamaican writers develop ebooks that carries culturally appropriate and globally relevant lessons with tech experts to create content for digital lessons. Little Johnny will no longer have to strain imported tobacco, as this will alleviate the perennial problem of heavy school bags. And parents will escape draining their pockets on everlastingly long book lists. This is how you level up the education system. Third and final bridge, Mr. Speaker, the assignment of educational technologists to all schools. In August 2018, GIS cited Minister Reid noting concerns about limited knowledge of technology among some trainee teachers, and rectification was suggested to incorporate ICT in college training programs. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament lauds these efforts and further submits to this Honourable House that there must be continuous training for all educators because technological advancement is not static. It is rapid and ever-changing. Kuwait City provides a prototypical example where they created an educational technologist position to keep technology implementation relevant to the rapid pace of change. Hence, we propose educational technologists for each primary and secondary school in Jamaica, with over 700 primary and all-age schools, 160 high schools. This is over 860 jobs. That's how you level up the education system. In concluding, Mr. Speaker, the world is getting flatter. A Jamaican child is competing with a child in Abu Dhabi. We have to ensure they are ready for the world. Let us prepare them to unlock the gold mines laid up in our underutilized resources so as to package and ship our goods to the world. That way, we will level up GDP as our youths level up to world standards and we roll the boat to global competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. We'll proceed to accept the submission from the Youth Member of Parliament representing St. Andrew East Rural, who serves this House as the Minister of Education, Youth and Information, Mr. Chad Rattray.
My rain may fall, never yield. Never yield. All right, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I must say today I am privileged to take some time from North Street to be at Duke Street to do the people's business. Mr. Speaker and members of this honorable House, we, the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica, strongly believe that the information, communication and technology industry is indeed the pathway to securing economic growth and job creation through education transformation. The youth unemployment rate has been steadily declining in Jamaica. This has been due to the formation of programs by the government such as HOPE and Hartrust NTA, which we applaud. However, the Statistical Institute of Jamaica reported that the youth unemployment rate in Jamaica was a staggering 25.4% as at October 2017. This is a problem which affects we, the young people of Jamaica. There have been massive investments in the BPO sector, the business processing outsourcing sector, in recent years. However, there are many untapped career opportunities that can level up the creation of jobs and grow our economy. There have been, in a Gleaner article titled ICT sector is more than BPO and call centers, shareholders want government to maximize other opportunity. States that Jamaica has in large measure ignored opportunities to take a share of the more than $2 trillion worth of information technology, knowledge process outsourcing system, architecture, and software engineering services market because of its singular focus on the BPO sector. A skilled and competent labor force is required to attract foreign and local investment in these sectors. We must move to incorporate ICT in our education system in order for us to form that desired labor force. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica cannot afford to be left behind as the world moves forward. Our recommendation, Mr. Speaker, is that we create a comprehensive plan to optimally utilize ICT in our education system. Here are our recommendations. Minister Green, please take note. Firstly, we recommend that the government should roll out ICT clubs that will be mandatory for students to join across the length and breadth of Jamaica that will focus on tactical learning of ICT. In the first year of a university student, Mr. Speaker, we believe that they should be introduced and exposed to ICT as a mandatory course, especially in teachers' colleges where teachers in training can have more access to information technology education to advance the learning scope of our students in the classroom. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we suggest that jobs within the ICT sector other than the BPO, such as software engineering, are promoted across the programs and agencies of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, so that more people will be aware of these opportunities and move to those careers. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, these implementations are required for Jamaica to move up, and take its rightful place as the regional leader of ICT in the Caribbean as we step up the progress in a partnership for prosperity. Thank
you. Much exuberance there. Thank you, Honourable Member. We'll now proceed to accept the submission from the Minister of Justice and Youth Member of Parliament representing Western Westmoreland, Edward Waite.
Mr. Speaker, information, communication and technology plays a vital role in any country. In developing countries such as Jamaica, it plays a vital role in boosting the economy. If we as a country is to ever achieve economic independence, we must move towards ICT to boost the economy. Today, I rise to this occasion to address this honorable House on how ICT influences economic growth. As the Minister of Justice, I believe it is unjust for the government not to cater for youths in ICT. Firstly, in order for us to achieve economic growth, we must move towards non-traditional jobs. Additionally, we are aware that the government is already investing in this area. We laud their efforts, Mr. Speaker. However, we are recommending that they put courses such as technical, vocational areas such as customer services and data operational courses to be a part of this area in the secondary level. The youth are not just asking for home management, building construction to be a part of this, Mr. Speaker. However, they are saying customer service, data operation is very important. In keeping with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, goal number 4, Mr. Speaker, says that we need to have a more inclusive education system that can facilitate all students. I stand here, Mr. Speaker, willing and wanting to see this implemented in all schools across Jamaica, both traditional and non-traditional, as they have long-term benefits. Mr. Speaker, too often jobs are available in Jamaica and our youths are not equipped to manipulate them. According to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, by 2030, significant increase in the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. Mr. Speaker, there is much more that can be done to improve our youth employability, and so I'm recommending again that customer services and data operation should not be an alternate route. The Youth Parliament is saying we want a 21st century workforce that is innovative and in alignment with traditional jobs and move towards an era where we can live up to our 2030 vision. Mr. Speaker, if we fail to prepare our students for the right jobs, then we will fail in terms of having an economy that will grow. In closing, we need to concentrate on the average youth. Close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Again, we must integrate ICT courses in the education system to achieve economic independence.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We proceed to entertain the submission from the Minister of Gender, Culture, Entertainment and Sports and Youth Member of Parliament representing Southern St. Catherine, Andre Witter.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, good morning. It is with humble gratitude that I rise to speak on information communication technology and its potential for fostering economic growth in education. The deaf youths have been able to receive a lot of donations from e-learning and UTech, and this has helped them in passing CXC English. This was first established through a program from the University of Technology by a man named Dr. Paul Golding. In 2016, he donated 100 tablets to the Listomere Gilby High School for the Deaf, where they developed in English and their vocabulary improved. I believe that the government should adopt all deaf schools in Jamaica. Currently, we're only supporting 6 deaf schools with a total of 10 on the island. This will allow for equal opportunity and equity for deaf community on the island. In 2018, 7 deaf students participated in CXC English. As many of you may be aware, English is our second language. Jamaican Sign Language is our first. With ICT, 7 of our students, all of them were able to pass, which is a first. Before, textbooks, they're not effective for the deaf community. It wasn't deaf friendly. With ICTs and deaf culture facilitators as language models in the classroom, we were able to move the children from just their first language and learning a second language, which is English. If we provide all the schools with the necessary ICTs plus deaf teachers who are language models, then they will be successful. Think of all the trees we will save when we go to the digital world. Deaf children have a way of learning through their eyes. They don't learn through their ears. And so we require full technology in the classroom so that we can fully participate. Over the years, technology has improved. I was born in St. Elizabeth, Southwest St. Elizabeth, and between Southeast to Southwest, there are lots of deaf people there. They were never a part of the system, the school system. So when text came, when digital came and text was developed, cell phones were being bought, and that's where vocabulary developed through ICTs. So with access to all, deaf persons can be independent livers. We have smartphones, we have Facebook, WhatsApp, IMO. This is really what the deaf community uses mostly. And it helps the deaf community to develop their reading level, and vocabulary improves significantly. Text, predictive text also helps with their vocabulary. I know one deaf person who couldn't spell his name before a cell phone, but now he can, thanks to ICTs. The fact is, Deaf Can Coffee, as we all know, they communicate with their customers using technology. They use tablets. So when you come in as a hearing person, you can communicate using a tablet. And the deaf community and the hearing person connects using ICTs. ICTs are really important, and that's the main priority for deaf education. The Jamaica Deaf Youth and Advocacy Network believes that if all deaf schools have ICTs, we will be one of the main nation builders in society. This also helps to reduce stigma, discrimination, and communication access, barriers to communication access. We face this a lot in social services and in the community. With ICTs, all of this will be gone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. We'll proceed to welcome the submission from the Youth Member of Parliament representing Trelawney South, who serves this House as the Deputy Opposition Spokesperson on Education, Youth, and Information, Ms. Felisa Ricketts.
Nelson Mandela posited that education is the most powerful tool that can be used to transform the nation. In order to understand how this transformation will work for our country, Mr. Speaker, we have to look at what education was like in Jamaica and what it is like currently. According to the Moines Report of 2012 on the educational development in Jamaica, there has been a disjoint between the school's curricula and the needs of those in Jamaica. It is with this dilemma, Mr. Speaker, why the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica is calling for a reformation in the way how education is delivered to our students. We are calling for ICT to be incorporated and inculcated within all our schools from the kindergarten level right to the secondary level, not only in our urban schools, Mr. Speaker, but in our rural schools that are oftentimes disenfranchised and marginalized. We are also calling for information and communications technology to be incorporated and inculcated in the education that is provided in state care facilities. The National Youth Parliament believes that it is necessary for the government to make this radical move by ensuring that all our schools are equipped with working computers and effective Wi-Fi connections from an early age so that there's a positive interaction with ICTs. By doing this, we're able to educate our society on how ICT can be harnessed to provide jobs and in turn provide economic growth and development within our country. Too often, Mr. Speaker, our wards in state care facilities are left behind, especially if they are not enrolled in public schools. We understand that not all of these children can be enrolled in public schools for various reasons, but this does not mean that their education should stop. The Cornwall County recently concluded our county project where we visited the Granville Child Care Facility, of which I was awarded 7 years ago. Mr. Speaker, these wards have a room that's ready to accept computers to inculcate technological learning, but they are at a standstill simply because they do not have the resources. They have no computers to put within this room. In another visit that was done to the schools within Southern Trelawney, which is a very rural constituency, many of these schools were either without a functional computer or simply had no computer present. The Wi-Fi connection was also lacking, and we're saying in this House, Mr. Speaker, that this simply cannot work. Our youth, they deserve better. We also looked at the unemployment rate in Southern Trelawney through a survey, and 4 out of 10 persons between the ages of 18 to 30 were unemployed, and we're saying that this simply is unacceptable. As a solution-based youth parliament, what then are we proposing to the government, Mr. Speaker? We're putting it on the table that we need to partner with corporate companies to provide computers within all our schools from the kindergarten level to the secondary level, especially rural schools that are often left behind. We're also saying, Mr. Speaker, that we need to ensure that we come on board and ensure that state care facilities are also important to us, that state care facilities are given computers, they're given ICTs so that they can add to the development of our country. We need to teach them how to write programs, teach them how to develop softwares, teach them how to develop applications and design web pages in this globalized, technologically advanced society. By doing this, Mr. Speaker, no longer will our youth be simply job seekers, but they will be job creators. Mr. Speaker, let us give our youth a chance by allowing them to capitalize on ICT in education so that we can rid unemployment and produce a better society and a better economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We'll now accept the submission from Youth Member of Parliament from Westmoreland Central, who serves his house as the opposition spokesperson on tourism, Ms. Tonian Dale.
Mr. Speaker, the Universal Service Fund has over 200 community access points across the island. The Youth Parliament is therefore proposing that we maximize these community access points, which makes up a critical component of the global economy. Interesting, Mr. Speaker, we are a country that sometimes by our actions lack the necessary skills and have proven to be a bagamote. Web page designing is a critical component of the ICT sector that we must capitalize on if we are serious about Jamaica becoming a digital economy. Mr. Speaker, according to the World Bank, 20 million United States dollars jointly with the Korean Trust Fund have been invested in this budding industry. So much so, Mr. Speaker, that the Jamaica Observer has reported that a 2-day digital screening business was held at the Spanish Court Hotel. Now, you may be wondering, why am I pushing for the USF to be integrated or to be a greater part of the project that already has 20 million in shore funding? The reason is quite simple, Mr. Speaker. That is because the Youth Innovation Centers caters to a certain subset of youth, and Community Access Point caters to the greater community. Mr. Speaker, in February 2018, the Jamaican Gleaner reported that a program sponsored by the World Bank caters for youth between the ages 18 and 24, and that, Mr. Speaker, in and of itself, I salute isolate, youth between the ages 25 and 35, which is unacceptable by any government who implemented that. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is on that basis that the Youth Parliament is suggesting that this program is managed effectively and efficiently to meet the needs of our youth, to restore hope in our youth, to positively transform our youth lives, and ensuring that all unattached youth, by whatever reason, will become not just a benefactor, Mr. Trainer, but most importantly, to be a benefactor of prosperity through web page designing, which only, Mr. Speaker, can be achieved through connectedness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. This time we welcome the submission from the leader of the opposition and the youth member of parliament representing Northeast Manchester, Mr. Andre Swaby.
Mr. Speaker, information and communications technology, ICT, is an important driver of development in all areas. Today, Mr. Speaker, this Youth Parliament aims to specifically underscore its relevance in the agricultural sector. Mr. Speaker, the most recent report from the World Bank Group records that in 2017, 18.62% of the population was employed in agriculture, when compared to 1991, where it stood at 26.38%. Mr. Speaker, this recorded a steady decline in the agricultural labor force. Mr. Speaker, unemployment rates among youth aged 18 to 24 years are the highest compared to other age groups, as recorded by the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, Statin. Mr. Speaker, a survey of the impact of agriculture and its direct relationship with economic growth and job creation records that during the last 38 years, from 1980, agriculture as a share of gross domestic product, GDP, dropped from 8.3% to 5.7%. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, the percentage of the labor force in agriculture decreased from over 30% in the 1970s to 24% by 1985. Mr. Speaker, this Youth Parliament believes in the need to transform the agricultural sector through employing ICT and the involvement of Jamaica's youth. Mr. Speaker, we are submitting to the government a concept known as electronic agriculture or e-agricultural transformation. This, Mr. Speaker, will help to remedy the issue of unemployment in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, e-agriculture is a global community of practice where people from all over the world exchange information. This system focuses on the use of ICTs for sustainable agricultural and rural development. Mr. Speaker, it is our hope that we will adapt this approach to agricultural transformation. Once upon a time, Mr. Speaker, agriculture was seen as a menial job, where people considered the task of farming as machete and hoe-oriented, engaged only by the elderly and a small proportion of youth. Mr. Speaker, our responsibility as youth parliamentarians is to rebrand this sector as booming and attractive. Mr. Speaker, failure to fully tap into the myriad of opportunities to advance through agriculture will result in an increase in food imports, which makes us susceptible to genetically modified foods. In closing, Mr. Speaker, agriculture has the potential to keep pace with other sectors of the economy, especially in alignment with population growth. Mr. Speaker, Vision 2030 highlights the need to enable economic growth and job creation through the use of ICTs in creating a technology-enabling society. Mr. Speaker, this underpins the need to create a competitive agricultural industry. Moving along the value chain into manufacturing, economic growth, and job creation. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica's policy perspective as it relates to agriculture is eat what we grow what we can, and can what we can't. Mr. Speaker, this is an ambitious campaign, which must be further energized by the introduction of new modern strategies, which will help to revolutionize the sector and level up the involvement of Jamaica's youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swaby. We'll proceed to accept the submission from the Youth Member of Parliament representing Southern St. Catherine, who serves his house as the opposition spokesperson on economic growth and job creation, Mr. Pierre Henry.
Mr. Speaker, our agricultural sector is dying. No longer are the days of slash and burn and sundials viable as our ancestors did long before. For far too long, we have used antiquated methods, producing the same result and expecting change. Madness! Mr. Speaker, the agricultural industry is deprived of technological innovation amongst youth who are interested but face economical and educational restraints. The Youth Parliament proposes the government collaborates with our local universities and the Rural Agricultural Development Authority to aid in research and policy development in e-agricultural space to stir economic growth. Mr. Speaker, a similar venture can be observed in Trinidad and Tobago, where the Regional Fund for Digital Innovation in Latin America and the Caribbean, FRIDA, has been engaged with the University of West Indies. Mr. Speaker, it is through this investment they created AgriNet. This e-agricultural project infuses ICT into the agricultural sector to build a knowledge-intensive agriculture economy and was developed to support agricultural sector targeting women, youth, and family farmers. Mr. Speaker, the question asked is how do we fund it and make it self-sustainable? Mr. Speaker, consider now the approach taken in Rwanda, which funds its ICT sector through a US $30 million loan, and a United Arab Emirates funds by taking 1% of the net annual revenues from their mobile providers. Unlike Rwanda, it is neither prudent nor sustainable to acquire a loan to finance this fund. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament recommends the Universal Service Fund. This agency is charged with the responsibility of ensuring access of information, the communication tools to facilitate ICT development throughout the country by placing a levy on international inbound calls. Mr. Speaker, currently the USF faces perilous times as the massive adoption of free social networking applications alongside the antiquated levy applied to the international inbound calls have resulted in a drastic fall in revenue. The USF reported that in 2016, they received a whopping $1.3 billion in revenue, whereas in 2018, they project to collect merely $750 million. Mr. Speaker, this is a call to action. Yes. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament makes two recommendations. One, the USF be revamped by revising its universal levy to further include a charge applied to both landline internet subscriptions and mobile data plans. Secondly, the funds garnered should be utilized to finance ICT development, research, and projects in the e-agricultural space as aforementioned. Mr. Speaker, I have to pull my buttons, as I'm a passionate man. Mr. Speaker, I implore the government to take this proposal with great consideration, ensuring commitment to our youth as well as to lead the charge in making Jamaica the premier technological hub in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Henry. We'll at this time welcome the submission from the Youth Member of Parliament representing Portland Eastern, who serves this House as the leader of opposition business and is the opposition spokesperson on industry, commerce, agriculture, and fisheries. Mr. Montel Hill.
Mr. Speaker,
I rise to speak on the issue of agriculture and its potential to drive economic growth through ICT. Mr. Speaker, our youth find it difficult to identify with agriculture because of how it is packaged. We need to understand that agriculture is more than 2 sweet pepper, 2 flaxy pear, and 2 dozen chicken. It is large-scale production, hydroponics, water treatment, agro-parks, underpinned by research, raking in millions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Studies stated that more than half of Israel's landmass is desert. Nonetheless, Israel is known as the innovative capital of the world because of its innovation in agriculture. Like Israel, we need to inspire the youth to see agriculture as a lucrative income earner. Mr. Speaker, investment is needed in educational, technical, and professional training through partnerships and education and exchange programs with countries with the expertise like Israel, China, Canada. These youth, after gaining the knowledge and skills, could be placed in our universities and colleges where the knowledge could be passed on to the community through internships. The vision of the youth, Mr. Speaker, is to get to the point where a child in Jamaica can say proudly, I want to become a farmer. At that time, we will know that agriculture is a big deal. At that time, Mr. Speaker, we can have agri-expense, so the farmers in East Portland can know the price of its goods and the local and global market. We can have agri-maps where the young unattached youth growing medicinal cannabis can know land and climate suitability. Mr. Speaker, we are about inspiring a vision around transformational agricultural technology. Mr. Speaker, food security is a global concern. The World Bank projects that by 2050, the world will need to produce 60% more food to meet the global demand. We should be ready to meet that market with quality products at high standard. That is why we need to understand and appreciate as a youth that we live in a global constituency. A child in Jamaica should not see his future competitor in business as a student from the school next door, but from Europe, Asia, and the US, who are highly skilled individuals. We have a duty to prepare them to have a global perspective and to compete with the best. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Lawrence Williams, a Jamaican-born scientist, has been celebrated on the international stage for finding an effective treatment for some types of cancer on the Guinean weed. A report from the SRC posits that Williams's discovery could change the face of medicine as we know it. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, I say, God bless Jamaica land of love. We have been gifted with healing herbs straight from the veins of Mother Nature. We need to do more so that this can be used to benefit the country economically. Mr. Speaker, it is time to sound the alarm. Members, if you want me to complete the presentation, say speak, members speak.
Mr. Speaker,
The member's time for speaking having expired, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable him to continue his speech to its completion, notwithstanding the limit on speaking.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to facilitate this. All in favor?
Aye.
All against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, that is why we're about the Partnership for Prosperity. Mr. Speaker, it is time to sound the alarm. Tertiary education is expensive. The youth are crying out for help. We're urging the government to listen to the voice of the youth. Whenever you make the move, I see many discussions around formalizing, legalizing cannabis. We are saying as a youth, whenever you make that move to formalize the cannabis sector and establish your taxes, consider establishing a marijuana tax and use the revenues to alleviate the pressure of expensive tertiary education. Mr. Speaker, we want to see the hope and dreams of our generation revived. Yes. Canada, St. Vincent, and Mexico are on the ganja train, and Jamaica is still at the train station. Mr. Speaker, our renewed position is that agriculture can win big for Jamaica through the insertion of technology, education, capacity building, and global exposure. Mr. Speaker, if God be for us, who can be against us?
Well, we thank the leader of opposition business for his submissions, and now we move to the youth member of parliament for the Trelawney North constituency, the deputy opposition. The Deputy Opposition Spokesperson on Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, Mr. Akeem Dobson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of this Honourable House. Mr. Speaker, we are critical thinkers as members of this National Youth Parliament between 2017-18, and we strongly believe that ICT coupled with education can cause a myriad of solutions to Jamaica's financial problems. However, Mr. Speaker, we believe that a healthy nation is a wealthy nation. And as a result of that, we want to approach it responsibly. We want to integrate ICT responsibly in agriculture. And as a result of that, we are looking on genetically modified food and its ills, Mr. Speaker. For those of us who are not aware of what GMO is, it is when you merge two different organisms to create one or to get what you so desire. However, Mr. Speaker, a number of studies have proven that this is detrimental to our health. Mr. Speaker, one critical health risk that was highlighted out of research by Smith in 2015 is that it supports infertility. Now, Mr. Speaker, I find that quite disheartening. Reason being, in Jamaica, men are called man-ginups if they can't produce, and women bear the shame of being labeled as a barren when they can't produce children, Mr. Speaker. It should not be that I am not able to produce my sons and daughters simply because I thought I was eating healthy, only to be told that I was eating unhealthily. It cannot be, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, genetically modified soy products in the United Kingdom skyrocketed to over 50% alone, Mr. Speaker. This is a crisis. Jamaica should not be a signatory to that crisis. Mr. Speaker, I represent a rural constituency with farmers playing a critical role, especially in the Sherwood division. Mr. Speaker, globally, you have 185 million hectares of genetically modified food being produced, Mr. Speaker. The Caribbean is within that number. The Caribbean has no legislation. Jamaica has no legislation to bar or to prohibit anything with genetically modified food. As a growing nation, a developing nation, which cannot be, it should not be, or else we are going to simply stifle the Sustainable Development Goals and Vision 2030. And if you don't believe me that GMO food causes cancer, Mr. Speaker, only in August of this year, in the United States, $289 million was awarded to a man who now has cancer. There were paper trails of emails that Monsanto knew that their products offered, or rather, a creator of cancer within people, Mr. Speaker, and they did nothing about it. In fact, they made their own researches. That means no genuine research was done. Jamaica should not be. I noticed, Mr. Speaker, that Agrichem was selling Roundup from Monsanto. It cannot be. We should not be eating poison when we should be eating healthy. It will stifle Jamaica moves, and instead, Jamaica will be dead. Mr. Speaker, I have 3 questions to ask, because I have not heard anything from the Scientific Research Council. I have not heard anything from the prestigious University of West Indies, which is now in the 5 percentile best universities in the world. Neither have we heard anything from the Bureau of Standard Jamaica, which has responsibility to ensure that its people are consuming healthily. Mr. Speaker, as a result of that, a number of recommendations has come about from this National Youth Parliamentarian. We are recommending, and Minister Green, I hope you are listening keenly, that Jamaica establish a seed bank similar to that in Ethiopia. What they have done in Ethiopia, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that they are eating organic food and to preserve organically, is to ensure that seeds are harvested, put in jars, and are held safely to be distributed to farmers in rural communities and right across Ethiopia. Mr. Speaker, we are looking to develop a premium organic commerce sector out of producing organic food. The organic industry over the world has increased by over 11%, Mr. Speaker. $39 billion in Jamaica is not a part of that. Just imagine, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica producing and selling premium organic fruits and vegetables locally and internationally. This would show, Mr. Speaker, that as little as we be, indeed we are Talawa. It simply means Jamaica would be the up-top boss in organic. Final recommendation, Mr. Speaker, or set of recommendation includes labeling of genetically modified food in Jamaica. People should know simply what they are consuming. Prohibit the cultivation of GMO food in Jamaica. However, we are not saying to ban importing it because indeed we are in a global space and we want to export our food. And Mr. Speaker, to ban the herbicide Roundup from being used in our country because it kills the soil, and soon and very soon there won't be anything to be planted. Mr. Speaker, this is how we are going to create a Jamaica that works for all, fostering a partnership for prosperity, leveling up to the challenge that we face, Mr. Speaker, but most importantly, we can say, oh Jamaica, see the signal waving in the sky, reinforcement our appearing.
Thank you, Mr. Dobson. We'll now hear from Ms. Mullings.
Mr. Speaker, we the members who have covered this motion conclude that the day should not be far off where we have full ICT access and use for every Jamaican child in school, in every state care facility and special need facility. Our deaf member demonstrated in a quintessential way how the often disenfranchised groups among us not only become connected, but become a relevant part of the solution. This will allow us to leave the train station and drive towards global competitiveness. For the agriculture sector, we are willing to join efforts and not just be a bagamout in nurturing a cadre of young people who will demonstrate, as the member said earlier, that agriculture is a big deal by applying the necessary technology to go beyond 2 sweet peppers and 25 chickens to large-scale production and e-agriculture-based entrepreneurship. This will significantly add to the country's gross domestic product. With this, Mr. Speaker, we can triple the 2.2% growth in April to June quarter of this calendar year in our GDP over the next few years. With this, Mr. Speaker, we, the Youth Parliament of Jamaica, have spoken on the country's advancement through the use of ICTs in education and agriculture. We beg for the approval of this motion as we look toward the submissions of our propositions to senior government.
The question is that the motion, ICT and its potential for economic growth and job creation in the areas of education and agriculture, be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the recommittal of the item, statements by ministers, to allow the Prime Minister to make a statement.
The question is that the item, statements by ministers, be recommitted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Madam Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is with great pride and pleasure that I rise again to address this House. Pleasure, Mr. Speaker, because I'm standing in a room filled with people who are indeed right with Jamaica. I sat here listening to the submissions made by the hard-working members of this youth parliament, and my mind was prompted to where it all began. On November 27th of 2017, a cohort of some of Jamaica's finest youth received the mandate to serve in the 2017-2018 year of the National Youth Parliament of Jamaica program. The Youth Parliament was originally started in 2003 and is a network that is non-partisan, houses different perspectives, and provides youth from all over the country a platform to express their views on issues of national importance. The most recent sitting of the National Youth Parliament would have been in November 2016. Since then, it has been revamped into a year-long program with the main objectives of developing us in the areas of project management, policy development, and parliamentary procedure. Let me take this opportunity now to express gratitude to the persons who played key roles in this. To our Minister of State in the Ministry of Youth and Education, Youth and Information, the Honorable Floyd Green, whose presence always renewed our passion for our why. Why it is that we chose to stand in this position with the great responsibility of being a vessel for our young people of this country. To the hard-working team from the Youth and Adolescent Policy Division in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, who have been with us from day one. Let us acknowledge Program Development Specialist, Ms. Cara Knight. Senior Program Development Specialist, Mr. Kevon Campbell. Policy Analysis, Mr. Davy Horton. And we must also give special recognition to the former Senior Director, Michelle Small Bartley. Let us also show our commendations to Youth Empowerment Officers of St. Catherine, Ms. Simone Green and Mr. Guyon Mitchell. I also want to take this opportunity to thank also everyone who could not be with us physically but made sure that the train was still going. We salute you and we thank you. To the Youth Advisory Council, who were our parents, friends, and coaches throughout this entire process, we want to say thank you. We were a handful, but you stayed the course and ensured that we attained our best selves. To the trainers who improved our capacity on a range of areas, we want to take this time to acknowledge Professor Trevor Monroe, Executive Director of the National Integrity Action, Mr. Tijani Christian, Chairman of the Commonwealth Youth Council. We also want to thank Mr. Benjamin Fraser, who is the founder of Speak and member of the Commonwealth Students Association. Finally, to the staff of the Houses of Parliament, thank you for investing your time to get us ready for today. Special thanks to Ms. Cheryl Gibson and Mr. Shana Wellington. At the beginning of our call to serve, we were assigned the different constituencies that we would represent throughout the entire year. These constituencies, for some of the members of this House, became our second home, as we were constantly on the ground interacting with the young people, carrying out different projects which had basis in the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as working with both our constituency member of Parliament and councillors to play our part in the improvement of our communities. In addition to these personal projects, we carried out county projects. As mentioned earlier, we rallied together and through partnership pulled off 3 impactful projects. At this juncture, I must reiterate the thematic areas that we delved into today. 1, the reformation of the electoral system, issues of national security, and information and communication technology in education and agriculture. We selected these themes as a collective because we felt that the youth perspective was not properly represented here. We have posited what we believe to be sustainable and forward-thinking solutions, and we strongly urge the government of Jamaica to regard our submissions with the highest level of importance. I say now to the members of the current political administration of Jamaica, continue to involve our youth at every level of decision making. This is vital to the fulfilling of Vision 2030 because the youth, the leaders of today, should lead the movement as we make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. To my members, I charge you to be proud today and proud of all that we have achieved over the span of the year. It has been a journey filled with many bumps in the road, many sleepless nights. But though we are sitting on opposite sides today, we have built a family and created memories that will indeed last a lifetime. We are now here, not at the end of the journey, but on another lap as we continue the work of advancing our positions and the agenda of the youth. I see you all, us all, as vessels chosen, installed, and positioned to carry the voice of the young people of Jamaica. I charge you members to not stop here, but the same passion with which we presented today must be the same passion that we use to continue to advocate for the development of our submissions in senior government. I charge you today to play your part in the continued development of our political system as we focus on creating leaders of today that will carry on the work that we have started this past year. To the young people listening, I charge you to get up from the back seats. We are living in a reality where we do have spaces for our voices to be heard, but there is much more to be done. Let us continue to kick in the door as we storm the genesis of change. Thank you.
The Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Swaby.
Mr. Speaker, we, the opposition, believe in working hand in hand with Madam Prime Minister and her team in tackling the issues affecting youth. Mr. Speaker, the Youth Parliament created an avenue for youth leaders to be heard nationally. It has provided us with an opportunity to experience the parliamentary democratic processes, which facilitated us in debating some issues affecting youth, such as issues of national security, ICTs and its impact for potential growth and job creation, and the reformation of electoral systems. Mr. Speaker, we demonstrated that today by our contributions to the debates on the motions put before the House. We are on this side, but not merely opposers. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we have worked to accomplish our county projects and assisted each other through the sharing of best practices. The challenges were many. However, Mr. Speaker, we have proven that together we can do great things. Mr. Speaker, today's parliamentary sitting concludes the joint thrust in one era of youth development, and so I encourage members of this honourable House to continue joining hands and hearts with other patriotic youth across Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, good governance is only possible on the basis of democracy, and this was embodied by our youth parliament over our tenure, Mr. Speaker. We are facing many challenges which threaten our shared objectives of youth development and stability, and in that view, tomorrow must mark the beginning of a new relationship between equals. Mr. Speaker, it is our task as youth parliamentarians to carry out roles of exercising scrutiny over issues affecting youth, thereby ensuring that the decisions taken herein and further are acted upon. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to reiterate what the Madam Prime Minister has done in thanking Honourable Floyd Green, the Youth and Adolescents Policy Division, by extension the Youth Advisory Council, in which applications are open, and I pursue and encourage each and every one of us to apply, the Houses of Parliament staff, the orderlies, and every person who made this a reality and contributed greatly to the success of this Youth Parliament. Mr. Speaker, we have already accomplished the task of being effective youth leaders, and we pursue our dream of Jamaica being the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. And I have no doubt that we'll continue to make Jamaica, land we love, a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we have no other business on the agenda, so I now move that this sitting be adjourned. Sine die.
The question is that this sitting be adjourned sine die. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This honorable House now stands adjourned.
gentlemen.
Keep we island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep we island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash, no paper, no dash, no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep we
eat.
island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. No dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica.
Happy birthday, Jason. I just wanted to tell you that I'm very proud of you. You're getting good grades in school, and at home you've really been helping me with the chores. I hope you have a great day. And I can't wait to give you your present tonight. Love always, Mom.
Teach your child the 6-step crossing code. Think first. Stop. Use your eyes and ears. Wait until it's safe. Cross when it's safe. Get across alive. A message from the Road Safety Unit in the Ministry of Transport and Mining.